Umbrella Academy Season 4, the grand finale, and I have thoughts. If you didn't already know, I am a huge Umbrella Academy fan. I have covered all the other seasons on this channel. I liked Season 3 more than a lot of people outside the very glaring problems. I've just always been such a fan of the vibes the show put out there and their willingness to commit to them. So I was really banking on this final season being a satisfying send-off, and sadly that is not what I got. I think the overall ending is probably the correct choice thematically for the show, but how we got there is rough outside some highlights. If you want the full rundown on the show leading up to this point, feel free to check out my other videos, but the general recap of where we left off going into this season: Reginald manipulates the gang into resetting the universe after they accidentally set off a grandfather paradox that starts to eat the timeline because he wants to start fresh in a world where he never releases the marigold to create the superpowered kids after realizing that it fails and blows up the world every time. So that means that no version of the Umbrella Academy, Sparrow, or otherwise ever happens, but they still make it over into this reset world because of a deal that Allison made when he was programming it. So even though Allison kills Reginald in this moment because he set up the reset parameters, he's back with his wife, who he had cryogenically frozen on the moon, and all the OG siblings, including Luther and Klaus, who were dead before they traveled through the portal to the Hotel Oblivion, but Ben is shitty Ben, as we learned from this season. Which was annoying in itself. They kind of just show him on a subway system in Korea at the end of the last season, so I was like, maybe this is a totally different Ben, but no, it's Sparrow Ben, and the Korea stuff will amount to absolutely nothing because I was so interested in what that might have been. And all the siblings are officially without powers in this reset world. I know a lot of people are kind of confused in the logistics of who got brought over and why, but I think it's pretty clear that Allison worked with Reginald to have things coded a certain way for specific people to be alive in this reset world, and that's why we see Ray from the 60s in the present. Patrick freaking who, am I right? But that's also another thing that just won't amount to anything. Klaus is just gonna mention in passing that Ray left Allison, so I don't really know if they originally had a 5-season plan or if the 6 episodes they got for this one versus the 10 they normally get meant they had to make a bunch of changes they weren't planning to, because Steve Blackman did say he apparently only pitched 4 seasons to Netflix, and I just can't believe that this is logistically where we would have ended up based on everything we just did. This season at times almost feels like a slightly different versions of the siblings from a different timeline that is just a little bit off, but so close that you wouldn't immediately notice the differences and just want to chalk it up to bad writing when, yeah, it's probably just weak writing. Some of it felt like they were really just hunting for reactions and ruining characters on purpose because they knew they didn't have to pull people back in for another season. They just had to get people to watch it now. We're ruining platonic friendships. We're not allowing characters to have personal growth and just putting them right back where they've always been. And not holding characters accountable for past actions that desperately needed to be dealt with. The Umbrella Academy has always been weird. That is literally so much of its charm, but some of the weird they go to here, it's just not great choices or not my brand of weird. Obviously it's gonna deliver on a lot of that fun absurdity that it's known for, but it's just lacking overall with too many new people and concepts that aren't given time to be fleshed out, and honestly would probably still have felt very stupid to me if they had fleshed them out. And I think my saddest takeaway is that, every other season, even when they hated each other the most, I could still feel this connection between them, this love between the ones that were trying, and that the level of hate was directly related to this confused love that they couldn't work through because of that shared childhood trauma. That all feels gone now, and even when they try to get it back at the end, it just doesn't completely work. But let's dive in, which means spoilers, but first a lovely little thank you to today's sponsors, my lovely Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members. Thanks for all you do. But that brings us to where are they now? Now, if you were hoping that the show was going to pick up right where we left off on the last season, you would be wrong. It picks up 6 years after the reset where they've lost their powers because Reginald doesn't release the marigold to create super kids, so they've all had to fall into regular lives. Victor owns a bar in Nova Scotia, which is always very exciting for me to see mentioned, but that makes sense because it's where Elliot is from. Luther is a brunch hour male stripper. Diego is a delivery driver. He and Lila have a whole ass family. Somehow her original family is here, which I don't know if that fully makes sense, but cool. Ben just got out of prison for a crypto scam.
Feds only went after me because I'm an outsider, fucking maverick like Lila.
Again, I gotta say, I hate that we have shitty Ben back. I get that it just took whoever was available in that room that fits this correct timeline and bopped them into it, but I was kind of hoping that it would reset fully to the OG Ben, and that's why, because it had to be the original Umbrella line, that Sloane is gone. But I guess you could argue that it would have undermined good Ben's sacrifice in season 2, and it just took the available Ben. But, I miss the good boy. I would have taken an entirely new Ben over Sparrow Ben. I know a lot of people were confused about the Sloane thing, but again, I really just do assume that it's because she wasn't taken into account into the reset with Allison, and resetting to the original timeline requires the Umbrella Academy as like the original unit or something. Hi, Amanda from the future here. Actually, no, Steve Blackman actually said that he would have liked to have dealt with the Sloane issue, but there wasn't time, so forget me trying to make sense of it. Okay, I just saw a different interview where my theory was one of the viable options. He just thinks she's still out there and didn't have time to explore it, so they're really just trying to play all sides of this equation. There's a deleted scene where Klaus literally says that Allison built this world and just like plopped Claire from a different reality into this one. Allison is still an actress, mostly of the commercial variety. Klaus has now become a full neurotic, afraid of death germaphobe because it's the first time he's ever had to worry about his mortality. He's even been sober for 3 years. Wow, that would be a great jumping off point for some personal growth this season, but no. 5 is still working for the CIA, and he's been working his way into conspiracy groups, specifically ones that seem to remember former timelines, called the Keepers, which I think is super cool, actually. I love that as a viable explanation for the Mandela effect. That while a bunch of idiots are messing with the timeline, trying to set things right, things like the Berenstain Bears are getting caught in the crossfire, and some of us will always remember it. For whatever reason, though, his CIA boss doesn't want him looking into it any deeper, which is mildly concerning that they've messed with things so many times that it's leaving behind actual artifacts, not just memories, and the CIA just doesn't care. But at the end of this particular support group meeting, 5 gets invited to a deeper level of the Keepers, run by Doctors Jean and Jean Thibodeau, which I think is just fantastic. That is just the level of quirky vibe I expect from the Umbrella Academy, and yes, I'm fine with them introducing some new villains here because we don't need to go that deep. It's all the other stuff they do that's but yeah, they just seem like this non-threatening, nerdy couple trying to collect evidence of an altered reality, doing underground deals for VHS tapes that have Allison starring in movies that now no longer have her starring in those movies. Maybe just a lovely couple burdened by a life stolen from them, until you see that they're willing to kill for these relics.
Not shot at.
They're just so desperate to get back to some semblance of a world where they just remember being respected. Now, they actually refer to the Mandela effect in the show as the Umbrella effect because the siblings are the main change from timeline to timeline that everyone remembers but now seems to just be completely gone. The deepest members even have umbrella tattoos. And Reginald is still an elite in this world, so they all seem very aware of his involvement of whatever that original timeline was, but obviously now there's just no superpowered kids around. This is also when we find out that Lila hasn't just been doing the family life, she's actually worked her way into the Keepers to do her own research well before 5. Girls get it done.
Girls do get it done.
But the Keepers' mission or ultimate aim is something called the Cleanse, which could either be the end of days or a great restoration of the original timeline. Love those odds, love a death cult. So that's the primary focus of this season. Stop the Cleanse, which we will get back to. But other than Lila and 5, the rest of the gang is literally just trying to live normal lives, whether they're satisfied with them or not. And while they're not at all close anymore, Luther is still just the one trying to bring everyone together. He wants to get Vic down from Canada for Lila and Diego's kid's birthday, picks up Ben from prison, does all the check-ins, which is what brings me to the first of one of my many great issues with this season that piggybacks off my biggest issue of the last season, the Allison problem. So she isn't planning to go into this party because she doesn't think anyone wants to see her because they would still blame her for this reset, but when she does, it's very awkward because she's clearly not someone any of them have still really been talking to, and Luther is the one who ends up making the move to make her feel more included. And I have a huge issue with that because for those who don't remember, Allison ends up using her powers of compulsion to assault Luther, to put it lightly, and the show never really deals with that. When she gets apologetic for her actions in season 3, it is because she's trying to manipulate people to finish Reginald's scheme. I get that she desperately wanted her daughter back, and I get that, but I needed to see her genuinely apologize to Luther for those actions because what she did to him has nothing to do with getting her daughter back. To me, it's just so fucked up that the show didn't deal with it properly last time. That was one of the biggest complaints about how that was handled and how like people were trying to downplay it because it was happening to a man, which does not change anything, and now he's the one trying to make nice.
Nobody wants me in there.
Nobody cares anymore.
Cool Lila, yeah, it's one thing for people to not care anymore that they got bopped out of an imploding timeline and losing their powers, but the Luther stuff is so much fucking worse for so many different reasons. You can try and use the excuse that this is only 6 episodes and maybe they didn't want to dwell on the past too much and we just have to think that it happened sometime over the last 6 years, but they waste so much time in this season with a lot of stuff that does not matter and actively hurts characters and their development that this should not have been bypassed. Honestly, in the second episode, she still tries to apologize for Victor for the stuff that happened with Harlan, who's down to forgive but has no interest in being close like they used to be, so even he gets more of an opportunity to hash things out compared to Luther. So Allison, still on my shit list. Victor actually gets the most allowance for character growth and self-respect this season, but there's room for some more, and honestly, I don't believe a lot of the Victor stuff, because I actually just don't know if anyone believes the emotions they're trying to convey on screen here, so it just doesn't come across as authentic the way that it used to, and that's so unfortunate because the characters were always the best part about this show. Outside the stuff with Allison, as mentioned, things are still awkward between most of them despite Luther's best efforts. Even Diego and Lila are having issues because he thinks she's cheating on him when she's doing all her spy work, but he also just seems to be taking his family for granted because he misses the glory days. And that obviously bothers Luther because Sloane never comes back, leaving him alone, and again, the best explanation I have for that is that the reset was programmed to make sure that all the Umbrellas made it over to the new timeline, but because Reginald never releases the Marigold, none of the other kids end up being born, so Sloane gets sucked from the timeline.
I know Sloane and I would have killed to have this.
Either way, it's just really annoying to me that they set up so many cliffhangers that just end up abandoned. I spent so much time trying to get everything on Ben's book here translated and it amounted to nothing. I think it was a poetry book and I was like, oh my god, is this a sweeter, more sensitive Ben? But no, apparently it says he's entering the financial district in Korea or something. So it's apparently that might have just been foreshadowing for his crypto scam, which makes no goddamn sense. But shit hits the fan when the family realizes that Victor did actually try and show up, but was kidnapped in the parking lot by a man named Cy Grossman. Thankfully, they track him down pretty quick because Cy really wants them to. He just says it's because he wants help finding his daughter who apparently went missing after getting involved with the Keepers and lets the rest of the siblings know that there's a full group of people who remember them as the Umbrella Academy to varying degrees, and he tracked them down through Allison's commercial work.
See, no small parts.
And while they currently have no powers and aren't very useful, Five abruptly says to give them 24 hours to find her because he realized that the box of stuff Cy had included a jar of Marigold, the substance that gave them their powers in the first place. Now, they do question how this guy's daughter was in possession of this Marigold, but not nearly enough. That's not something that should have been able to just get lost out there in the world reset, so I don't know why they're not just banging down Reggie's door to ask about it. And the other thing that no one bats an eye at, which I guess maybe is fair, is that the guy's daughter's name is Jennifer, which seems like it's obviously going to tie into the Jennifer incident that they've trickled down to us since the last season and in the comic books.
Ben died during the Jennifer incident.
Tragic. Oh, tragic. I'm not finished.
I get that a lot of people have that name, but it's this show, so for us, we definitely know it's going to be that Jennifer, and it's going to be so annoying how they implement it, in my opinion. Not good. We'll get there though. Back to the Marigold. Instead of continuing to wonder how this dude's daughter had it, they're debating whether they should take it and decide that it's all or none, which Ben immediately trumps by tricking them into taking it with their sake bombs. So they don't even have to try and deal with any of this while powerless for long, which makes that seem like such a pointless change because it had no real consequences. Which brings us to the Power Conundrum. Now, most things kind of check out and people kind of just end up with souped up versions of their powers that they don't have full control over, but the logic is kind of going out the window. Luther gets his super strength back, but then also goes half ape again, even though he never would have been injected with the serum that turned him half ape, so it literally makes no sense for that to have happened. Did they just forget that that wasn't part of his power set? I hope not. Then the rest of them just kind of have spotty luck with application. Diego just has instant perfect aim and can do all this crazy redirection of bullets. Victor seems to have about as much control as he used to, but now his powers look like Harlan's did. But Ben's tentacles just flop out against his will a bunch. Five just randomly blips into his weird subway where the announcer speaks backwards and can't get anything else to work. And Allison and Lila's powers just seem weird or heightened, but never fully used. Lila just has eye beams out of nowhere, but then still has mimicry towards the end of the season and only uses it in that final episode. But then Allison is now telekinetic, but she can also make people do things crazy without having to say it out loud and uses it one time the entire show.
Well, my new power's dope.
The only person who doesn't get their powers back is Klaus, because he lied about doing the sake shot because he's sober. I honestly can't believe that any of them let their 3-year sober brother, who used to be in a perpetual sloppy mess of a death cycle, to even take a sniff of the alcohol. But whatever, it just feels like the writers didn't want him to have his powers back yet so they could use it to manipulate our emotions later. Either way, they decide to go check in on Sai, who has now vanished, leaving a map behind with the town of New Grumpson, Maine circled. And even though it is directly mentioned that this is probably one big setup, they still decide to go check it out. Look, I get that you hate Daddy Dearest, but maybe you just go check in with them to see how Marigold could have possibly made it into the world and if he knows anything about why someone's trying to get them to this particular town. It's just frustrating logic to me all around here. They are literally being herded like toddlers. So they get to the town and it's pretty weird. There's like a bus stop with no bus, all Christmas Village-like. Definitely believe that this season was supposed to be released around the holidays, and the strike and delays changed that because it has the vibes. But the town starts to get even more weird when they start asking if anyone knows who Jennifer is, and by weird I mean just completely militant on them. Turns out this entire town is a sham to protect Jennifer, who is Rosie, the diner owner that Ben's just been getting so cozy with. So yeah, whoever Sparrow Ben's Jennifer was in season 3, nothing to do with this one. Just a totally unrelated Jennifer incident. But this Jennifer is most likely connected to the Jennifer that was in the main Umbrella timeline, because this fake town is owned and run by Reginald Hargreaves. The most nonsensical thing here is that even though Jennifer has known these people her entire life, she for some reason trusts asshole Ben with the tentacles more. Dude literally just sprouted tentacles. She knows he's a crypto scammer and she's like, yeah, this one, I trust him. I'll leave behind everything and everyone I've ever known behind and we'll run away together. To get a fun little cameo here though, before they tell us that Rosie is Jennifer, Elise Bauman of Carmilla and Almost Adults tells Klaus that she's Jennifer, maybe so that they'll stop looking for the real one, or maybe just to get rid of the getaway vehicle. But Ben comes running with the real Jennifer in that moment, so Klaus gets shot. So him not getting his powers back with the rest of them really just feels like it was done to fabricate an emotional situation here that barely has an effect, because Allison puts the marigold in the wound and he just pops right back up. His powers remain pretty much the same, but later on he's gonna fly, so you know, good for him. Some heightened abilities, literally. So they quickly realize that Sai is not Jennifer's father and he just manipulated them to get her out of this town, and before they can try and figure out why, Jean and Jean show up and snatch her away. Which I guess is as good a time as ever to fully go through the Jennifer incident. And I'll be honest, as mentioned, kinda hate what they did with it. They give us a character that we're supposed to really end up caring about, but don't really give us a reason to. They introduce some entirely new thing and lore around this character that becomes a central conflict in a way that you feel like it would have been mentioned before, but it never has. Making it quirky seemingly for the sake of quirkiness with no real explanation, hinging a bunch of emotion on a Ben that is not the Ben we fell in love with. And even though people had mentioned the Jennifer incident before around Ben's death.
The Jennifer incident.
The what? Ben died during the Jennifer incident.
None of them seem to remember what it actually was, and the way they try to logic that into this is not great, in my opinions. What we do realize quickly is that, surprise, surprise, this Jennifer runs the risk of destroying the world. She's apparently the key to the cleanse that the Keepers keep talking about, the one that would bring about the destruction of all branches of the timeline. And she enters the world in a giant squid. She gets pulled out of the ocean by another Canadian treasure, Chris Locke of Who's Your Father. But yeah, she's just alive in this thing and pops out, mentions the cleanse, and then has absolutely no recollection of why or what that is. She remembers the squid, and that's it. And she is horrified by this thing, but has, no explanation. She just thinks she fell off a boat as a child and got eaten by the squid and somehow didn't die. Either way, after New Grumpson, the siblings have some questions, but they split off to get the answers. Ben goes to find Jennifer because they have a literal physical connection now that they've touched, creating this weird energy rash, which I'm sure means great things on the way. Lila, 5, and Diego decide to look into the Keepers and Jean. Allison, Luther, and Victor go to talk to Reggie, and Klaus starts stealing for drug money because why not? All this, except Klaus, gives us more pieces to the puzzle. Sai helps Ben use the weird rash connection to figure out where Jen is. He asks no question about why Sai thinks that Jennifer is so special, because he's just this selfish little rat boy. Acting here, though, particularly rough.
What is happening to me? It's her.
Diego actually finds a file that mentions the Jennifer incident that had 2 casualties involving the Umbrella Academy on the day of Ben's death, a relic of the original timeline that 5 knows about but just says that it was a tragic accident.
What the hell's the Jennifer incident?
That was a tragic accident.
which leads to the conversation with Reginald and his wife Abigail, who seems less than pleased with him, where he reveals that Jennifer was in that town to protect her from them. She apparently has some kind of wild abilities through another substance called Durango that when she comes into contact with someone filled with marigold sets off some horrific world-ending chain reaction. And that once they do come into contact with one another, they'll just continuously be pulled and drawn to one another against their will. That's apparently what happened on Reginald's homeworld. His wife created marigold, not realizing Durango is being made at the same time, and it sets off a chain reaction. And that's what original Reggie was trying to prevent all those years ago when Ben died. They were sent on a mission to destroy the shipping container that Jennifer was stored in, but Ben realizes someone was in there, pulls her out, and the other Reginald shoots them both to stop this reaction. And then went on to erase the remaining kids' memories, so they basically just have this script in their head of an explanation of what happened to him.
Ben died because we failed as a team. Ben Hargreaves represented the best of us. Ben was the Umbrella Academy.
And I don't love that. It just went from a piece of information and mystery to us that just never needed to be said out loud by them to details that were never known by any of them, and start making it feel really convoluted as to what Reginald's aims ever were. And the memory stuff doesn't even really make that much sense. Like, yeah, they cover Ben by having him get shot from behind, so he wouldn't know how he died necessarily, but he'd absolutely be asking the siblings how it happened, and this confusing moment would have happened so much sooner. The only thing I really like in this is the flashback, you know, like seeing how Ben didn't even want to go that day, but Reggie made him, how Klaus had already been through rehab, all the developing personalities of their roles. But yeah, personally not a fan of what they made the Jennifer incident. Especially with this Ben not even mentioning the connection he had with another Jennifer. It's just very weird. But because they've connected, this destruction event has already been set in motion with Cy's help, who Abigail is potentially involved with.
We're approached by Cy Grossman.
They just linger on her face for no reason. But using what Cy told him, Ben rescues Jennifer from Jean and Jean in a full-on murder trip, doc-ocking around the place, and they do start to wreak havoc. They start hooking up, and it sends out this shockwave that decimates everyone in the area. Like black sludge explodes out of their eyes. Oh my god, Jojo Siwa! I'm sorry. And these effects just seem to ramp up the more they're around each other, and it's kind of interesting because the better Ben seems to be feeling around her, the worse she seems to be doing. And in my opinion, it's only gonna get worse on that plot point from here on out.
What channel are you on?
It's the Blob.
I love this movie.
Oh, they're watching The Blob, the foreshadowing. So that brings us to stopping the end of the world again. Now that Reginald is aware that Ben and Jennifer have connected, he wants to kill Ben, which Victor won't allow. I will say this whole Victor standing up for himself against Reginald is lacking so much that Elliot can't even bring the sincerity to line delivery. Also, this isn't the same Reginald that kept him off the missions his entire childhood, so you're not actually standing up to your abusive father here. This just feels really unnecessary at this point, and I also don't know why Reggie just didn't kill Jennifer instead of setting her up in a fake Truman Show type town. Like, I get that he thought he was covered since he never released the marigold, but there was always a chance it would get out there, so why even keep her alive? I think the answer is going to end up being that his wife wanted him to do it so he could be kinder, but like maybe for other reasons, but whatever. Once again, the Umbrella Academy starts to destroy the universe by trying to save it because they were manipulated into kidnapping her, so now the cleanse is set in motion. So that's really the main conflict here. What is going on with Bennifer, how the Keepers are trying to make sure the cleanse happens, how Cy seems to have manipulated it all in Jean and Jean's favor, even though Jean hates him.
You're a cryptic little son of a bitch, aren't you?
With it being the last season and only having 6 episodes, you'd really think they would just hone in on these bigger issues and fleshing them out in a satisfying way, but no, some people just need to get their weird little side stories. Like Victor hashing things out with Reginald so he doesn't kill Ben makes sense to me. Victor's removed someone's marigold before and thinks he can do it again to stop this chain reaction or even just pull that Durango out of Ben. Diego and Luther take up Five's boss on an offer to chill with the CIA to try and stop the Keepers, which makes sense both on the mission side and for Diego to deal with the emotions he has towards his life feeling stagnant and the relationship. It feels miserably for them when they realize they've just been like put on the B team of the CIA to distract them, but Luther does accidentally uncover that Five's boss is actually a member of the Keepers, and that's why he wanted Five to stop looking into them. I also feel like that could have been used better, but okay. Lila and Ben end up getting caught on the subway system to different timelines because Lila thinks they could go back to the original timeline and stop that Jennifer incident from ever happening. Issue being that Five hasn't actually been able to travel through time anymore, just space, so even if they do get back to that apocalypse time, there's no guarantee that they could end up back at the right moment, but hey, it's at least an idea. I'm sure nothing could go wrong. And then Klaus being fucking useless. I'm not even gonna blame him. It's the writers. He for some reason gets himself killed by a drug dealer he owes money to. It feels like he's like fishing for it. He wants that feeling or something. So then he gets caught up in addiction again and starts being used as a sex work psychic for this guy he owes money to. Totally irrelevant, totally destroying any of Klaus's character development. This was the time for him to realize that he could have his powers and be sober. And I get that this is like the runaround way of getting us there, but like you don't need to show us him going back to what seems like some episode 1 introduction of like, oh yeah, here's what Klaus has been up to. And yeah, I guess in a roundabout way, he does realize that, but it's never really focused on in that way. And this was just totally unnecessary to have him just used and abused like this in a way that they think is like funny. It just seems like a real shame that they completely missed the reason why people like Klaus. There's just so much more he could have done here if you were going to heighten his powers and psychic abilities. There's so many interesting options you could have gone with, but no, it's a Pet Cemetery. I know this Klaus storyline is in the comics, but it just doesn't work at this point of the story in the show. And they even try to sell it as him trying to save himself before Allison actually does help save the day. So it's just a terrible way to do it. And this is also maybe supposed to be like some redeeming moment for her, but she also still hasn't properly apologized for what happened with Luther. It's just, I hate all of this. But before we can get into whether or not any of these plans end up being successful, because who are we kidding? It's the Umbrella Academy and they're never successful. We need to talk about the Lila and 5 debacle. Yeah, they get their own header. They don't even fall under what the other siblings are up to. They get their own spots. And people are pissed. Look, I saw this show a couple weeks before it went live to the public, and I knew people were going to be mad at this, but I didn't realize exactly how pissed everyone was going to be, but shit. Yeah. So Lila and 5 think they've made it back to the original timeline, but realize they were wrong, and now they can't get back, and they get lost for 6 years. Also, I need to mention that for some reason, his time travel powers works in the other universes, just not in their universe. They don't really seem to age much in the 6 years, and I just kind of assume it has something to do with the way the time travel works, and obviously it means only a few hours have passed where they've come from. But yeah, 6 miserable years of subway hopping before 5 decides he just wants to find a nice little timeline to settle down in. And they do that for an entire year, which is where things go to shit and people are losing their minds. So all this time together, instead of using it as time to just really reaffirm that they're great platonic friends and make Lila appreciate Diego, they fall in love. I get that Diego was the one being a little shit on the other timeline too, but I feel like that was a two-pronged issue and they needed to be together to deal with it, and that's not what happened. And them falling in love feels weird on multiple levels. For one, they've always just kind of had the friendly platonic thing going on. And she is married to Diego and people really like that dynamic. But I still have a hard time seeing 5 as not a little teenager, even though I think in this timeline in physical age, he's like 19 or 20. And now apparently he'd be like 26 or 27 after their time in limbo here. And mentally he'd be in his 60s. But yeah, he's a little teenage boy to me in some ways thematically. I get it. You're trapped with someone for so long. You get along well enough. You're seeking for that connection. But their dynamic was always just so fun on the friendship side. And this just derails it for no reason. I have seen a lot of people throwing the P word around, but no, it's a weird age gap for sure, even in the bounds of the show and the actual actors, so I can get the issues with pursuing it. But neither the actor or the character are underage or portrayed as such in this moment, so just remember that words have meaning, though I do get the discomfort in that area. But again, it's a big boy word. So again, my bigger issue is that they even thought that this was going to be a good idea to pursue at all. But for me, I just can't believe that Lila stopped trying to get home when she has kids. I get taking some little breaks on this 6 to 7 year adventure, but come on. Because obviously it's just going to make things super weird once they do get back. 5 finds a journal, another version of himself clearly hid that explains exactly how to run the system. And while he doesn't want to go back, Lila doesn't even pause.
How long have you had this?
5 months, maybe 6.
What are you doing?
I have children, 5.
Oh, so now you care about the kids? So it just adds this whole other shitty dynamic where apparently 5's been hiding that journal for 6 months and he knows he's going back to a timeline where she's married to someone else with kids and doesn't really seem to care to take him into account here, and he just still loves her so much, and it's just trash, it's terrible, and we have 1 episode to deal with it. We have 1 episode to deal with it. Guys, come on. The thing I feel the weirdest about is that I genuinely believe the writers thought that people would just feel really bad for 5 because 5's one of the favorites, and they'd be like, oh my god, he's heartbroken. But no, they're like, I can't believe Five would do that to his brother. This is disgusting. Steve Blackman actually said he added it to the show for himself. That was his big swing to give Five a love, but I think we're all forgetting Five's true love, Dolores. Also, he hoped fans wouldn't hate him for it, and that's not going so great for him. They do obviously have Diego find out because it's the final episode, so they can't just try and buck it down to a future season.
Did you SKREW my wife?
But they don't even really have to deal with it in that moment because they find out where Ben is stashed, so they just kind of bucked it down the line anyway. Whatever, it's time to set up the final episode. Apparently the reason Cy knew exactly where Jennifer was but couldn't just go in and get her himself is that Cy is actually Lady Hargreaves. That's why she looked guilty when Luther mentioned Cy Grossman's name. And she's just been so desperately nice to the siblings this entire season while just making all these snide comments at Reginald. So for some reason, she wants to go directly against her husband and set off this cleanse without anyone knowing. We figure this out when she kills Gene and then meat suits into him instead. Weirdo alien behavior here, repeating constantly. But whatever, Jean got too hostile, I suppose, and now she theoretically has more control over the keepers. You know, if she could stop taking personal digs at Reginald and making herself seem weird.
Forget even entertaining somebody else's opinion or respecting their wishes. You never listen.
What the hell was that?
So she ends up killing the other Jean because she realizes something very weird is going on, and it's just all a mess here. So you may be wondering, why is Reginald's wife trying to destroy the world? Well, apparently she doesn't think he ever should have brought her back. That her death was punishment for being part of the destruction of their world, and he should have let it happen, even though that is not the impression of what I got happening to her originally, but whatever. And she's just horrified that he'd ever release the Marigold here, and he says it's because he misses her so much. But yeah, it really just comes down to her now wanting the cleanse to erase all the unintended timelines because the Marigold is actually what ruined everything by splitting off the timelines, even though it's the cleanse that she doesn't want to see happen. It is both a mess and not satisfying. Back to the keepers though, it is pretty cool how they assembled them all together. The call signal is Map of the Problematique by Muse, which just really adds some grandiosity to the situation. Muse always makes things more epic. And they're mobilizing literally just to make sure that whatever is happening in that location happen. And what is happening is blobby bullshit. Look at this crap. Mommy, can we get annihilation? No, dear, we have annihilation at home. Victor does manage to sneak in and start pulling out the Durango that's infected Ben, but it's also when the tactical team gets the go-ahead to shoot him because Ben wouldn't let Victor answer the phone. But then he gets this weird little flash of a utopia thing from Ben's mind, but honestly, no idea why they didn't just shoot Jennifer instead. Reggie could have pulled some old BS like, oh yeah, don't worry, Victor, we'll leave Ben alone. Didn't say anything about the girl though. But whatever, Ben pushes Victor out of the way as the shot's coming through, but as it enters him, it is right when Jennifer touches him and they start to combine into a blob kaiju, which I hate. I hate it so much. I hate gross things. I hate big dumb monsters. I absolutely hate this whole thing. I hate that this is how this is ending. And they all try to fight it, but it just makes it get bigger and they get caught up with knowing that Ben's in there somewhere, except for Diego and Five, who are just fighting each other until Lila says it's over to Five, so he blips away just to be done with them all. Like, who cares? I can find new siblings. You guys just keep ruining everything. But that leads him to the Cafe of Fives. All the Fives that have given up on trying to save the world because they've tried and failed over 144,000 times.
145,412.
Which is what makes R5 realize that the only way to make everything completely right is to take themselves out of the equation.
We're doomed to save or destroy the world over and over again ad infinitum.
The act of releasing the Marigold into the universe is what shattered the timeline to begin with, and even if they didn't have it in their system from the reset, they still only exist because it ever happened at all. So what he thinks needs to happen is that they need to release their Marigold and allow themselves to be absorbed by the kaiju so that everything resets without them, and the only reality that'll exist is that original timeline that would have happened without Reginald's involvement. So this wouldn't even be them dying, this is them ceasing to exist ever. Very sad considering their family is here, which Lila tries to loophole by going away with them in the subway system before sending them off without her. At first I was like, wait, you can't just send them to like a random timeline and hope that they survive because you're erasing all the other timelines, but apparently she now knows what the proper first original timeline is and just sends them that way. So that's nice. Claire will live on with all of Lila and Diego's mostly unnamed and unknown kids.
Does anyone else not like this plan?
Yeah, that scene really got me though. Like Lila having to send them off, like that made me cry. For some reason, Allison and Claire didn't get to me, but like I feel like Lila's really given her, and I feel her emotions compared to so many of the other things that have been happening this season and in the big emotional moments. But now it is the end. This big, disgusting, terrible plot element comes to collect. And while I did want a little bit more out of this moment and the connection with them, thankfully it is still sad, and thankfully asshole Ben is the kaiju, so I don't have to pretend he's the Ben I care about and be sad that he's not here. So that's nice. And after they're consumed, you just see all of those subway timelines just start getting erased, and somehow Lila's family and Claire are totally happy and at ease at that original singular timeline, which kind of makes a little bit no sense because them existing is a relic of that past, even if they don't remember who birthed them into this world, because you're now not the original world. You're not that original timeline because you have people that don't exist technically because they have no parents.
Elmer has created a paradox. The grandfather paradox.
But whatever, that's fine. Fuck Patrick, I guess. That's what he gets for leaving Allison when she did some fucked up shit.
On the 12th hour of the 8th day of August, 2024, absolutely nothing out of the ordinary occurred.
And it's kind of a nice send-off, even if it doesn't make sense, because pretty much everybody they've ever encountered that would have been available in the modern timeline is here. So you've got the Swedes, you've got Hot Mommy. That's something that's nice. I always like to see that. Nice little narrator send-off, kind of hitting in the fields. But then after the credits, it shows 8 marigold flowers coming out of the ground with marigold sprinkling off. So I'm not sure if that's supposed to be some like nice little send-off of like, look, it's representing the sacrifice of the siblings, or if it's some weird. It's probably not. I was like, is that leaving it open that they could sprout the marigolds here? Could things, I think it's just a nice little send-off. And overall, yeah, that's an ending that I'm okay with. It makes sense. The universe just can't survive with them in it, as much as I would love to have seen them happy somewheres, retired, living cozy lives. That just wasn't in the cards for them, and I think maybe we all knew that at our hearts. Though on the other hand, I do think it's messed up to be like, hey, these traumatized kids who've been fighting for the world and each other and for acceptance constantly. Yeah, turns out the world actually is worse with them in it. Kind of a bummer there, though I also don't agree with the Victor sacrifice solution, because all those broken timelines would still exist, and Victor's kind of shown that he doesn't have the best track record completely pulling out the marigold. Now, do I wish it had been a very different series of events that got us to that point? Absolutely. This was bad. The Jennifer stuff is very bad, in my opinion, not just because of the kaiju thing, largely because of the kaiju thing, but it's just, I get that only getting 6 episodes probably railroaded a lot of plans, but just seeing what they did choose to keep in it, I don't think it would have been any better with the fleshed out episodes. And that's just unfortunate. Because sadly, the scrappy dynamic, the emotional moments and quirky fight scenes just weren't enough to save things, as fun as so many of them were.
What? Hey! Luther! Oh yeah, they do that.
I'm still working on my list of continuity errors and issues and how things tie into earlier seasons, like outside of the ending making sense for them needing to just be removed from the timeline, just more like Reginald's story and stuff like that. But hey, we'll always have the early days. Catch you back in season 1 or the 60s. Howdy, Amanda from the future here. They did release some deleted scenes in between the time I recorded this and when I'm editing it now, so just a quick little note on those. Some of them are really lovely and I recommend checking them out. Like there's one of Klaus filling Lila's family in on the timeline debacle and 5 asking about his sobriety, and it's very like somber, and I think it's a good setup for his character struggles this season. Then another one with him and AA struggling with the concept of powerlessness once he gets his back and how he hurt the people around him. See, I personally would have just cut out all the sex psychic stuff and just focused on this, but oh well. But I think my favorite is actually Luther and Diego going to get these stripper suits for the CIA, and Luther really reckoning with what happened to their Ben all those years ago, and him feeling the weight of not being able to save him, because like this season made Luther and Diego so dumb and punchlines for almost the entire time, and so it was kind of nice to have them have a good conversation back and forth until Diego tells him he's a bad leader when, hey, he's the one who pulls all the people together, and he's done some great leadership throughout the seasons. Either way, solid scenes, and I would have liked to have seen them in the show. But let me know what you guys are thinking down below. It was very interesting to see the social media comments flip so quickly from people being excited to just like hostility of like, Sorry whoever's running this social media account, but I am upset. Let me know if you guys agree or for whatever reason you are really satisfied with how this ended, which I'm sure some people probably were. But that is going to do it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. Thanks as always to my Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Leave a like on the video if you're into that kind of thing, and all my other social medias are down below. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I am still mostly okay after this kind of disappointing ending, or very disappointing ending, but we'll catch you all later.